Hello, I am Tony Meneses. I'm a playwright, and I am also the interim head of playwriting at Fordham University, where I have been teaching theater and playwriting since 2010. So I'm now in my 14th year. And I've been doing a lecture on structure and plot and sort of classical ways of looking at storytelling for the last 14 years. And because most of the time when I do this, it's to introductory students, not even theater majors. So I always like to kind of boil it down to what are the most essential things that feel like one should know when starting to write a play, whether it's a 10-minute play or if it's a fuller length play. There is sort of the fundamental ways of things that we can think about when we're deciding to be a playwright. So for me, in my own kind of history and education, Aristotle was a figure that was taught to me very early on. Uh, and I use Aristotle, but the one thing I will clarify is that Aristotle is not law. It is not dictum. It is not strict code to follow. It is literally extrapolate what you need and want, apply it to your own work, and, figure out what feels useful in terms of advice, if you will, that Uncle Aristotle has to offer. So first and foremost, the way I like to start is the biggest, broadest way to even understand plays in general comes from Aristotle, and that is with the 6 elements of drama. Some of you may have heard of this before, but again, it's sort of worth recapping because though Aristotle speaks of these 6 elements of drama, these 6 ingredients that every play should have, particularly within tragedies, I extrapolate and say it applies to every play ever written. This is just things to think about, no matter if you're writing comedy or tragedy or any other genre. It is important to remember that every play has these exact same ingredients. So I'll start with these 6 elements, and then we'll get a little more specific about structure and plot and storytelling, which, spoiler alert, is what Aristotle really says is the most important thing for a piece of theater to have. And we'll get into why in a second. But firstly, I think the one that most of us probably attach ourselves to most easily is character. We all go to theater because we love meeting new people. We love empathizing with them, relating to them, finding some sort of attachment or relationship to a character on stage is, I think, how we get the quickest buy-in for a play. Do I like this person? This person seems flawed, but I'm interested. Do I invest or not? Or, worst case scenario, if it's a play that doesn't have good characters, you're like, I don't care about any of these characters. Why am I here? That's not what we want to aim for. But character is the thing that we, I think, oftentimes attach ourselves to in terms of having a good experience in a play. When we get to the naturalism tradition, that's when we get real sense of character development and psychology, and even Darwinism starts to influence the kinds of theater being made at that time, late 19th century. But we'll save that for another lecture at another time in another context. But character is important. I think it's the reason that most of us love going to the theater. We love falling in love with people on stage. I think that's a sort of inevitable. So that's one of the elements that Aristotle does posit is an important thing to think about when writing a play. There has to be characters, people embodying things on stage. The one that is most important to him, though, is plot. And by plot is exactly what I'm sure we all have that connotation of what that means. It's story, right? Beginning, middle, and end, cause and effect. That's often how Aristotle likes to think about how plot should be included in plays. Very classic structure way, a way of transcribing events in a story where they're building and building and building and leading to a climax, and then there's fallout. So I'm sure most of us have studied that little triangle in our English classes that has, the beginning, the inciting event, and then rising action. The peak of the triangle is the climax, the falling action, the denouement, and the resolution. That actually, sidebar, was created by a German dramaturg named Freytag that then has been adapted in terms of how now we're taught this structure of ways of looking at plot and stories. Aristotle, though didn't give us that little triangle, kind of set us up for that, and probably would agree with it, that we do need things to happen in a play. Uh, Aristotle also famously said, you can have a play without character, but you can't have a play without plot. And now what does he mean by that? Can you have a play without character? By which means that you don't even need fully developed characters for us to get engaged. We have to care about the actions happening. So on the inverse, I think you can fall in love with an ensemble of characters, but if they're not doing anything and if nothing is happening to them, our buy-in starts to get a little bit tested. We get restless, we get impatient, we get bored. And I'm sure some of us have seen some stuff like that where we're just not engaged, even though we like or start to like those people. If we start to get a little itchy in our seats, it's because nothing is happening. So this is why Aristotle really triumphs plot as the most important element of these 6 elements of drama. And we're going to get a little bit more specific about well, how do you do a plot in a second? But plot is essential. It has to be story. Everything has to have story. I always joke that it's kind of like why airport novels sell so well, because they're so action-packed. There's always events, and even if the characterization is on the slight side, what's happening in those stories is often engaging enough for us to go on that ride. So plot, number one, Aristotelian favorite element of the six. Then we have sort of other complementary ones that are important, but I think plot and character are probably the two things that most of us as audience members really latch onto. We love good characters and we love good stories. I once learned in my own education, good storytelling is just good gossip. So imagine just hearing good pieces of gossip as audience, you're going to lean in, you're going to care about. And gossip is often things that happen. Someone said something, someone did something, and that's how you engage an audience on a very rudimentary level. But these other four elements, just for the sake of argument and exposition here, they include language. Literally, how I teach it is just word choice. What is on that page? And every writer, I think this is how we playwrights find ways to distinguish ourselves, because plots, you're not reinventing a wheel. There's sort of very similar structures of stories and plots. Tragedies, end terribly, so that's not new. Comedies end happily, that's not new. But the word choices that we put on our pages and in our characters' mouths, that's how we distinguish ourselves. So I always like to sort of distinguish styles of writers. Like Annie Baker is known for sort of her economic language, her pauses, her silences. Someone like Jose Rivera, a magical realist writer, has been described as one. Some poetical language, heightened language. So that's where that writer's voice is really translating, is in their word choice. So as you start to write, you will start to find what kinds of words your characters are saying, and then the style of that, the point of view of it. With language, I also like to latch on melody or rhythm. And for me, the way I teach it is just, this style, these word choices start to create a little bit of a song, a little bit of a pattern here. Again, using Jose Rivera as an example, his poetical word choices create a poetical verse and rhyme scheme. So it starts to feel a little musical, starts to feel a little heightened, and just kind of creates its own kind of natural composition or flow. Likewise, again, Annie Baker, because of the silences and pauses in her work that has made her distinctive, the rhythm of that language just feels different. So those two I often kind of attach together. They're hand-in-hand buddies. So rhythm slash melody and language slash word choice. Another one to think about is spectacle. This is kind of my personal favorite. This is what makes theater theater at the end of the day, is the use of spectacle. And that's exactly as we understand it to be in our modern connotation, right? The way I like to teach it and frame it is a sensory experience. And in theater, often visual, but also it's an audible experience as well. It's what designers bring so beautifully to the work, is just how do we experience these worlds in sort of very visceral, visual, oral kinds of landscapes to just help lift the story and create a sense of wonder, especially with theater that doesn't have, I think, the benefit of like film and TV or CGI, where even the stuff that happens with those kinds of tools, we're still made to believe that it's real, even though obviously it's not. So I often joke when I do my hands like this, what am I doing? I am suddenly driving a car, right? Just moving my hands back and forth. In theater, we can do that. Someone sitting down and doing that gesture, our imaginations immediately transport us and say, oh, that person's driving a car. That's something that only theater can do. You can never get away with that in any other medium, artistic medium. So that's why I find theater to be the most spectacular kind of art form, because it is the most nimble and creative, and you can do a lot with very little. And the audience's sense of suspension of disbelief, believing what's on stage is a real thing, is often so activated. You can't do a play if people aren't suspending their disbelief. Even if you are doing the most realistically rendered set, we're still pretending this little black box theater with that living room in there is actually a real living room in the world, even though we know it's not, right? So I love spectacle. That's what really makes theater, I think, the most exciting and dynamic art form. And lastly, we have theme or thought. And that is, kind of what it sounds like too. What is this play about? What is the message, the moral of the story? What is this in terms of more kind of contemporary language? What is this play asking? The dramatic question. Good plays should be asking questions, not answering them. I do believe in that. But ultimately, what is this writer interrogating, wrestling with, and choosing to go on this journey on to show us? Sometimes writers know that theme. Oh, I'm interested in exploring XYZ issue or topic. Sometimes it just reveals itself onto what you're writing. So it's not right or wrong to know what your theme is as you begin writing. That isn't something that you should automatically have to diagnose. But I think everything has a theme because it is your voice as a writer that's saying something about the world, and how you're choosing to express it reveals a certain kind of politic or a point of view about the world that we're living in and the questions that come up as we all start to struggle with our own humanity and then our humanity in relationship to other people's humanities and the world around us, etc. So those are the 6 elements. To recap, we have character, plot, uh, language, melody slash rhythm, spectacle, and theme slash thought. Every play has those 6 elements. Doesn't matter the genre, doesn't matter what style of theater. It could be the most experimental avant-garde play. I guarantee those 6 elements are in there in some fashion. Whether they're adhering to the primacy of one over the other, it depends on the play. But they include those 6 elements. Back to the original thesis about, well, which one is the most kind of classical in terms of knowing how to even think about writing a play? It is plot. Now, plot is very challenging because there's not a really easy way to learn it. You kind of learn it by doing, to be honest. But there are certain specifics about how to engage with plot that are kind of important to know that, again, it's like terminology that we may not know, that we may intuit because we've all grown up on stories, but when actually exercising it is kind of nice to label for ourselves as writer, like I'm engaging with this kind of thing now in order to heighten the kind of story that I'm interested in telling. So as I said before, plot is just cause and effect. So as an exercise, I outline every play, and I know not everyone does, but for me, I find it helpful because it actually helps with my structure and my plotting to know how, at least on paper, uh, my events are building onto each other and leading to something. I like to kind of know the map, and things change and evolve. Maybe I'll add an extra scene that I didn't know needed to be there, or take out a scene, or refigure and reconfigure some of the events of the story, which comes first or later. But it is kind of nice to know a little bit of a map. So outlining I find helpful. But regardless, if you choose not to outline and you just write a draft, whether you outline or not, I do find it helpful to retroactively then look at your play. And if you are struggling with, like, is this plot moving the action forward in an effective way? Is this little exercise that it's kind of a cause and effect one where you kind of distill all of the major dramatic events that happen in your play. I'll be arbitrary and just make up an example. Long lost sibling shows up on doorstep or of an estranged sibling. That's the first inciting event. Sibling invites sibling into house. They get into a fight about a past circumstance. Other sibling kicks out that sibling. That sibling ends up at the doorstep of their mom. So it's just sort of the ways that these events, because these things happen, they lead to the next one. So this is the cause and this is the effect. The exercise, to be clear though, is to lay out all the dramatic events and then just add the word because in between each one. So you have because brother shows up on doorstep of long lost sibling, a fight ensues that rehashes old secrets and old betrayals, and because these secrets are revealed, sibling kicks out other sibling to then leave, and then because this happens, they go to their mom's house, and because they go to their mom's house, this happens, because that happens, this happens. So if you really want to boil down plot into the most essential way of understanding it, just even as mechanically as that, that's how you do it. Is just literally add the word because. And if something doesn't fit, if you're like, wait a minute, this event doesn't, with the word because in between, doesn't lead to that event, then odds are you've gone perhaps a little bit off the rails in terms of your plotting. You've gone somewhere else. And this can happen. I think sometimes, exactly to Aristotle's concern about plot versus character, we fall in love with character ourselves as writers as well. So sometimes we'll write a scene where we're just honestly hanging out with characters or seeing another side of them or seeing them in a different environment, in a different setting. But if there's not an event happening in that scene, it's not moving the events of the play as a whole forward. Advice I often got as a younger writer: if there is a scene, an event, or even a character that if you were to take them out of the play and the play is still the same and still ends the same way, then that scene, event, character doesn't need to be there. And again, we fall in love with characters or events or scenes that we write, but then sometimes it's kind of the hard work to go back and realize this is actually not needed for a clean, effective story that has a sense of action and movement and plot. So again, sometimes those scenes are good as exercises to just get to know characters better or get to know the world better, but really be judicious about like what specifically happens in this scene. What is the dramatic event that happens that directly leads to the next thing? I also learned some language around this sometimes too, that scenes should not have the word then in between them. So like this happens, then this happens, then this happens. That is not plot. you should actually have words like therefore or because of. So things that, again, propel events and actions forward in a cause and effect way. So that's plot kind of in a nutshell. And it's hard to know until you're doing it. And odds are when you get stuck, it probably means you're snagging something with something along the way in terms of telling an effective story. Specific Aristotelian language that I find very useful, that I've extrapolated for myself in terms of every play that I think about, are two particular word choices or words that Aristotle uses that I find useful. The first one is this concept called peripety, or peripeteia in Greek. A peripety is a shift, and that in terms of classical definition, it is a shift in fortune. So in a tragedy, it's a shift from good to bad fortune. You know, something's life is going, and then something really terrible happens, and then the shit hits the fan, and then we're dealing with that fallout. In a comedy, it's often bad to good fortune. Some character finds $1 million in a trash can, and their lives are forever changed, and we sort of are dealing with these absurd, fanciful antics that can ensue from there. But it is a shift. And why I find that important, whether I don't think any of us really actively write tragedies these days by the letter, but I do think we need events to happen that change characters' lives forever. This is often what actors get taught too. Like, how is today different than any other day in this character's life? As writers, it is very useful for us to engage with a question like that too. How is this day, this play, unlike any other day or play or moment in these characters' lives that's going to forever change their lives? And this is basically what I'm boiling down to. Plays have to have change. And this is why peripety is so useful to think about, whether it's such as direct as like good to bad fortune, or a toggling of good to bad to good, bad, bad, bad. The way the journey and the evolution of your plotting may be, things have to change because we won't sit in a play where like nothing happens, where nothing is changing. And obviously things need to change in kind of irrevocable ways. So characters' circumstances change, the events outside their lives have changed, et cetera, et cetera. So change has to happen. And that's ultimately, it's human nature. If you're sort of wondering, well, change, why it sounds arbitrary, it's not. Our lives are known for change. So our circumstances are constantly evolving. We lose jobs, we have breakups, we move to different cities. Those are powerful, dramatic events that happen in our lives sometimes. And that's what makes it dramatically interesting, is because our lives have been forever changed by an event or a circumstance or another person. So that's what I find most useful about peripety as a concept. It just activates us to think about how things have to change. And that can happen internally within one scene. I would argue how a scene begins and ends should not be the same. Something by the end of the scene has shifted, has activated, that is moving, again, the story and the character forward in time. And they're not just sort of in the same space, mind space, or given circumstance that they were when the scene began. So peripety, very, very helpful. It allows us to, again, go on a journey, an actual ride. And of course, to zoom out even more, how a play begins or how a play ends should be very different than how a play begins. It should not be in the same universe, the same world. Something has forever changed in those characters' lives. This one is my favorite of the concepts that Aristotle argues. So peripety I love because it makes me remember that things have to happen in a play and that things are forever moving the characters along in significant, meaningful ways. But my favorite is this concept called anagnorisis in Greek, also just known as discovery or recognition. Anagnorisis is also a shift. It is a shift in awareness, or a shift in knowledge. So a character learns something. So being in the dark to being in the light, that shift in awareness. They are ignorant and now they are knowledgeable. Now they are aware. How that translates? It translates in all kinds of fun ways, especially in contemporary kind of playwriting, where sometimes it's the content of the story. An event happens in that play that is a big aha moment. I think I often describe this moment as sort of that moment where the shit hits the fan, where something happens and you didn't expect it. So it's a big surprise. It's the twist ending, if you will. Now that doesn't have to happen at the ending, but it is sort of to boil it down, it's a secret. Every play, I argue, should have a secret. Whether it's the characters' secrets that they're withholding, that we learn something, often in the climax, often in the end, which is why when they have impact, we sort of have that oh shit moment. But anagnorises happen all over. Secrets are constantly being discovered along the way in the journey of a play. But I would argue that probably the biggest secret should be saved for the end. Otherwise, there's no journey to go on from there. So anagnorisis, I just love, because there's nothing that I think what theater can do now still that other art forms still can't, is this ability to surprise an audience. So it might be content, maybe there's this big thing that this character is not revealed. Maybe we sniffed out something. Maybe the playwright gave us some Easter eggs and clues that maybe allowed us to understand, like, there's something going on here. What's happening? And then we learn it, and we have a big shift in awareness ourselves as audience that we didn't know something and now we do, just like probably the characters in that play learn something about that character that has forever changed their lives, because again, these events should be dramatic and they should change things. But I also think that even plays as containers can contain anagnorises themselves. I think about often of just like set design surprises or just structural surprises. We think we're in this naturalistic world for the most part, and then we're kind of in a different world in the last gesture of the play. So sometimes we're even our expectations are subverted also in just like the structure and the frame and the form and structure of a play as well, in addition to like the literal plotting or the characterization going on as well. And it's why I think theater works, is because unlike movies, which do have to behave a little bit more formulaically, and television too, you can't really rattle the cage too much there. In plays, you can go to some really surprising and astounding places and what you're allowed to even do with structure and form. So those are the two kind of ways that I like to think about how anagnorisis can be engaged. Is it's either the structure and form of a play, the container, or also just the narrative, the story, the characterization that's happening. So literally someone is withholding something, or you as playwright is withholding something about the play that we learn, and you sort of flip the script later on. Again, it is very thrilling when it happens. I guess I could give good concrete examples of both. This is going to be spoiler alerts. We're clearly going to get into some secrets that get revealed here from plays that I think should be hopefully more or less familiar at this point in terms of recent theater. In terms of structure and containers, An Octoroon by Brandon Jacob Jenkins, operates as kind of this satire of this old 19th century American melodrama. And the structural surprise, as anyone who is there, is this big scene design moment where there's a wall that is there the entire time, and we just know this world exists with the back upstage wall. That wall, during a key moment in the play where a ship blows up, instead of literally, you can't show a ship blowing up on stage, right? So the way that set designer, Mimi Lien, decided to render it is that wall fell down, and there was little cotton balls all over the set. The reason why I won't get into now, but all those cotton balls just went flying into the audience with a rush of wind, and everyone was covered in cotton balls, and it felt like a ship was exploding. That for me is a container of a structure of a play that an anagnorisis was there, because we sort of believe this wall is a wall and it's just going to be a wall for the whole play, and suddenly it is not a wall, it is a ship exploding. That is a delightful, thrilling surprise that I had never experienced in a play until that one. In terms of content and story, so many examples. I feel I would wager any play in modern history, a character is revealing something that we didn't know before that is going to forever change their fate. Let me think of an example recently that I think is really, really effective. Okay, this is a big one, so I apologize. But John by Annie Baker, uh, the last line of the play, I won't give too much detail, but the last line of the play changes the entire play, because we think there's a dynamic going on, there's a relationship going on, people are telling lies or keeping secrets, and we never really know who's telling the truth, particularly with one character. And by the end of the play, we have this last line, which is my favorite last line in all of theater history. And I've literally had students say when they read this line, they literally throw the play across the room, is how shocking it is. It's that kind of a moment where we learn something so big based on the characterization and story of what was structured in Annie Baker's play, that it forever changed how we understood what came before. So those moments, again, they're thrilling, they're surprising. It's just, I just think that's the greatest gift that we can give an audience, because to kind of maybe zoom back to the beginning of our lecture here, stories have been told since the history of time, literally like campfire stories have been told, right? That's lore, that's mythology, that's religion, just that's what storytelling is. We have not reinvented storytelling maybe since the beginning. But what we have done is just innovate it and subvert it and surprise what we can do with it. Again, an artist's voice, their point of view, is going to make that story feel fresh, but how they treat events, especially classical traditional ways of thinking about storytelling and dramatic events, is what allows stories to continue to feel fresh and innovative and exciting. So, we all know coming of age stories. We've read them in English classes, we've seen them in plays. But usually, what happens in those, what makes them stand out from the rest of the crop, is that that writer has chosen to give us characters we've never seen before, with language that perhaps we haven't heard before in a certain way, and with a plot that may feel familiar, coming of age as this character is growing up, they're learning, their hearts are getting broken, they're dealing with just their own suffering. And by the end, of course, they're more grown up, they're more mature, they're more aware of the world. They go from child to adult by the end of a coming of age story, right? That can't change. There's no coming of age story where that doesn't happen. However, the how of what we get there, thinking about stuff like peripety, the kinds of changes that are happening, what are those specific events to allow that, coming of age story to happen? Does a parent abandon them? Does a best friend betray them? Those are all distinctive and choices you get to make in terms of what dramatic events feel truthful to that character and to that journey. And then for me, an anagnoris is the surprises that happen along the way. Who's the character that they never thought they were going to connect to from the beginning, and suddenly it becomes the most emotionally relevant scene and meaningful connection that they make with someone that we never expected them to have this sort of connection that allows them to grow up in a way that we just didn't see or could have anticipated. So I do find peripety and anagnorisis are two Aristotelian terms that are very useful to think about in making sure that the stories, which again are not new, but they feel new. What are these events that change things, and how are we being surprised by them? And then again, just to not make Aristotle mad here, the most important one is during the climax. So if you think about those, that classic triangle that I alluded to earlier, if you have and save that big secret of the play until that moment, that's when it has the most impact. Oedipus is the most classic. I mean, Aristotle literally writes about Oedipus in the Poetics, where he lays out all of these rules and structures that we know. When we learn the big secret in Oedipus, it is at the climax, and it forever changes both the peripety, the fortune, the shift in fortune from these characters, and also the shift in awareness. Oedipus, without spoiling that, learns a lot of big things in that climax. So I won't spoil that one for us. End to end, no matter what kind of play you're writing and what you're interested in exploring, and if you want to be more traditional in your writing, something that Aristotle also gives us is that every play should have a sense of magnitude. This I find, the more plays that I see, the more that I really start to honor what Aristotle meant by it, because I think we can sense when a writer is really saying something urgent and necessary, and whether it's their own like personal truth or a truth about the world, when there is magnitude to it, when there's scale, when there's scope, when there's ambition to it, I think that's when it really matters. So, it's okay to write plays where you're just sort of figuring out characters and you're figuring out your own voice and your own rules. But I think when you'll key into something that I have to really say this right now about the world, it's literally spilling out of me. I have to put this down and put it in a play. Odds are your play has some magnitude to it, because it is absolutely essential that you tell this story. And I think that's sort of the gasoline that keeps us going, even as we sometimes may get frustrated with plot or structure, like, oh, it's not going how I want, this event isn't connecting the way I want, or this character, I don't really know them yet, let me figure them out some more. As long as you can return to the magnitude of what you're writing, the importance of what you're saying and why you're saying it, there's only one of you in the world, and your voice is going to be the only voice to tell this story in this way. So just remember that as the heart and soul of who you are as a writer, is that no one's doing what you're doing, and that hopefully what you're writing has, again, that sort of sense of urgency of why you're doing it, and that the world kind of needs that voice, needs that story in there. I think just to give it some specificity here, I think the amount of progress we've made in terms of authentic storytelling, we realized how urgent it was for specific kinds of writers to tell their own stories, because it wasn't being done that way. And we're receiving it now. It's just sort of kind of in a big scale in the magnitude of receiving these kinds of works, because it does mean something to hear work that has a sense of voice and a sense of urgency to it. So I think Aristotle would be very pleased with the amount of work that's been happening lately, because I think we're all still honoring what he gave us thousands of years ago, which is shocking in itself, remarkable that this is how important and essential and intuitive, ultimately too, of what good storytelling should contain. Except now we're all just doing it in our own way and picking and choosing what really helps set us up for telling the best kinds of stories we can as playwrights.